$1 we're spending in interest on our loans was to American citizens who had invested in this debt, because I think that's what the idea was originally, is that this was just going to get reinvested back into the country, but so much of our debt now is held abroad that that interest leaves the economy. So maybe the government needs to do a better job of attracting personal investment in that sort of thing.
One argument internationally, though, is that that money is being invested in other economies can actually benefit if the United States works mutually with their trading partners and the people that they
with the net exports.
Right. So I think that's like a very emotionally charged kind of position that's taken up by this argument. But I think economically, it might be more.
You're saying the cycles are more complex, that as far as stimulating them buying from us, et cetera.
Right.
Because we depend on trade.
We're in a global economy, so I think that it's a little bit different also now in that regard.
And then people have argued that the fact that foreign governments have the larger stake they have in our economy, the less likely that they would lose faith in it because of their valuation of their currency within the dollar.
So this mutual interdependence, all the scare headlines in Time and Newsweek and whatever, the 90s about China and what they could do to us. But in fact, from a realpolitik standpoint, you say, no, we're now so intertwined. We can't fail. They don't want us to fail. They're not going to pull the plug. I mean, is that the
right? That's
argument?
One of the arguments. One of the arguments of the global marketplace is the U.S. is the biggest market. In terms of, at this point, it is. I mean, obviously, you could be overtaken by India or whatever it might be, but for consumer goods and so forth. And so, if that marketplace closed up and people aren't able to consume the same way, that would hurt the export market of China or whoever these manufacturers are. And that's one of the Krugman last week had an article about how the Chinese currency is being continued to be devalued because of that. Because if it gets too strong, then we have larger problems.
But there's also a common misperception that the United States is, that China is the world's greatest producer. It's actually the United States.
Right.
So although we think of ourselves as post-manufacturing, we are still the number one country in terms of manufacturing in the world. And the reason that it seems to us otherwise is because smaller items that are consumer goods are made in China, and yet things that are much larger, like jet engines, are generally done in the United States. And so in terms of a gross national product figure, it outstrips China by, I think, by a third right now. Yeah.
For manufactured goods rather than
All
business
manufactured
services?
agriculture too.
Oh.
So again, it's that sort of mythos that's in the, in the popular press. And while it has changed, it's not like the sky's not falling in that regard.
I mean, Yarrow doesn't, in terms of solutions, the only thing I would add here is that, Yarrow doesn't get into it so much because I think his approach is more technocratic. But certainly Peterson's book is very much around kind of cultural and educational solutions to the problem. I mean, I think you get the sense when you read the Peterson book that he, although he served, did he serve in Nixon? Nixon, yeah. That he was dismayed by the Reagan Revolution. And I think that's why Reagan gets so much attention, because he's not of the old order of Republicans. He comes in, he's got, that David Stockman in the budget office, and then a number of other people who were doing voodoo economics, as it was called at the time, and so this supply side nonsense. And he just, it was like he drunk the Kool-Aid. Like Bush, we can have everything. They were emblematic of new ways of thinking about the economy that I think for the conventional Rockefeller Republicans such as Pete Peterson were really frightening. So I think that, but I think Peterson sees it as a cultural problem as well as an economic problem, and that the solutions have to be cultural and economic, political, educational. So, because I do think Americans really all have come in the last 20 years to think there is some sort of free lunch. This is what the nonsense on Wall Street, I think, just showed, that by your shell game of somehow something of value was being produced when it wasn't. And I mean, I do just think that, so that's the question that, you have right now is, has anybody learned anything from this debacle? I mean, it's certainly not Wall Street. I mean, you wouldn't think, and I think people thought a year ago that people really were going to take some hard lessons from all of this economic fallout. I mean, less confident that anybody has. I mean, there seems no will in Congress for making changes, and in fact, they just want Sarbanes-Oxley to go out so that they can go back to their accounting, foolishness of, the Enron type stuff.
Two things. Going back to what you said about consumption earlier. Elizabeth Warren has a great book about chewing gum trap, and she talks about the consumption is another myth. That the Americans are not necessarily buying, and I said this to this group, are not buying things to keep up with the Joneses. What most of them, bankruptcies and so forth in this country, overwhelmingly have to do with medical problems and medical health care. So that's one of the things we have to keep that in mind from the idea of Americans, all they want to do is buy flat screen TVs and get their new car and so forth, and there's and leading to personal bankruptcy and depletion of the savings rate and so forth. That would be an interesting thing. And then we're going to ask everybody to read the Peterson book for next week. Not next week, sorry. For January 18th as a way of. Some of you already read the Peterson book, but the Running on Empty's book.
And would that Warren book be useful for?
I'm trying to find more of our articles that have more primary to this, because the two income trap, there's a lot of data on this, but it's more about how the middle class is losing place in America. I don't know if it might be worth it for us to read, but let me look at it again.
It speaks to the cultural issue of you can have it all. I mean, whether or not, who's thinking what about having it all, whether it's the consumer or the person on Wall Street who's, or congressman, or the people on Wall Street using money to make money as opposed to work to make money.
Yeah, I just related to that. I think that what the lesson I've taken from the financial debacle, at least initially, and I hope this changes, because my sense was it was going to be, the new sheriff in town was going to clean things up, and yet Obama and Geithner have not done that. And what it suggests to me is that the financial industry is much more powerful and embedded in Washington than we ever imagined. That despite all of this debacle, we still can't get meaningful reform there. Suggests that they're much more powerful than I ever imagined. And that's alarming. But, correct.
One thing, and I certainly agree wholeheartedly with all those arguments, but the one thing I'd say that I feel still has prevailed as after a year after this has happened is that the media and I think the public opinion has changed about how some of these people act. And I think that these extreme measures of financial irresponsibility of people and how they have these huge bonuses and really just these exorbitant sort of bonuses and things like that. The media has critiqued it and put it sort of as a target. So you hear about these people who have had to resign or had to apologize, or which I think beforehand they sort of didn't even get captured. So I still think they're still a target. I think especially in a time when it's a bad economy and people are suffering, and they recognize the financial industry has been directly linked to the problems in addition to the housing market. So I still think that some of these just outrageous behaviors that people are getting caught with, it's still being covered in the media a little bit, and I think I don't know how much change is occurring, but that's still lingering.